All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football podcast. Today, me and Nick, you'll be looking at Billy Napier and his tenure so far with the Florida Gators, and if he is the right man for this coaching job. I've correctly predicted the 6-6 and 5-7 first two-year campaign, so I feel like I'm well equipped to talk about this team. Nick's record predictions, I think we're just on par, not far behind one bit. This is going to be broken down in a couple of segments. We're going to have timestamps below if you'd like to skip around. Billy Napier, though, a highly coveted coach who was patient when leaving Louisiana Lafayette. Spent 4 years there, a 10-1 and then 12-1 season, winning the Sun Belt in back-to-back seasons, 40-12 record before bolting for Gainesville. This is a guy a lot of people wanted. He worked under Nick Saban for, a number of years, worked with Dabo at Clemson, Terry Bowden as well. So this is a guy who has plenty of experience. He's worked with a lot of great guys, did good work at Arizona State as an offensive coordinator in 2017 before making that jump to the Sun Belt. And it's been a bit of a bumpy road so far, Nick. You look at recruiting, though, that's where we're going to start. His 2023 class, ranked 12th overall, landed 5 recruits in the top 150, highest being 49th overall cornerback Jakeem Jackson. Only played about 100 snaps this past season, but, this class still had some highlights. Starting with building up the trenches, they brought in 3 guys, Kelby Collins, TJ Searcy, Cameron James. They all arrived around, 6'4", 250 or bigger. Those builds as freshmen pretty solid, had mild impacts at worst, added a few more guys as well. Didn't see much time, but Napier building up the trenches on defense. It's a pure must to win in the SEC. Not some bad, it's not bad guys they were able to bring in, and I think these players are going to have a big impact. One thing that's pretty clear is Napier is building up this defensive line, Nick. What do you make of that 2023 class? And, of course, him being that highly coveted coach from Louisiana who hasn't exactly produced great football so far.
Recruiting is sort of a time process here that takes a while when a coach jumps into a new program, especially in the SEC. I think people were concerned in Florida when Napier jumped in and didn't grab any 5 stars his first year. Didn't really worry me as well. I think Jakeem Jackson's a very solid player they got. A guy from in-state. When you're building in the SEC, you have to recruit on your home territory first. I always say, I preach that win the battle in your home state, then go out and take players from other states. And Florida is a very talent-rich area. Certainly areas like Georgia, California, Texas have some more talent, but Florida is right up there. Great climate for playing football year-round. These kids play early and often, and they can really produce some solid talent. His early class here, the top 5 players, 4 of them were from the state of Florida, and one of them, Kelby Collins, on the defensive line, he was from Alabama. So I think this is a great class to start beginning to work with. Some solid size there in the trenches, like you alluded to. Collins is a good player at 6'4", 265, 4-star big guy on the interior. Cameron James as well from Olympia, Florida, Olympia High School, Orlando, Florida, 6'6", 265, and then they also got off onto tackle with Roger Kearney, 6'4", 300 pounds, another 4-star. These are some high-end 4-stars here. He went in there and immediately started working on the trenches before attacking the skill positions, which he did do some work on in his class of 24, which we'll highlight a little bit later. That does have some talented skill position players as well. You got to build the trenches up first. Certainly, this is a program that was weak in the trenches at times under Dan Mullen, and Billy Napier inherits that and starts to begin getting to work there. I like Napier a lot. I think he's a solid coach. He went over his accolades at Louisiana. He was a really solid coach. He won the division with Louisiana all 4 years. He was a head coach there, including 2 straight conference titles before bolting for Florida. A 40-12 record and 27-5 in the conference is very impressive. So far, I think he is continuing to build. You need to give a coach like this time. He's got the resume, in my opinion, and so far these classes, they have not been amazing. I know people panic because they lost some talented players in the last couple of days due to some flips, but overall, this is still a good class for 23 and a good class for 24 coming up.
And finishing up that 23 class, Jordan Castell, who's an underrated 3-star corner. They put him at safety, ended up being their best defender. That worked out very well for them. Speaking of an impactful trio of weapons, though, on offense, they went to 3 wide receivers, Andy Jean, Aiden Mizell, who preserved the red shirt, and then Eugene Wilson, who gradually exploded into a great pass catcher, caught at least 3 passes in each game he played in, week 2 and beyond. Kanaja Harris, a 3-star offensive tackle, was really good in his appearances as well. So this is a class that has some nice building blocks on the defensive line. Some of these pass catchers will be more involved this season. And they're hoping their top-ranked prospect in Jackson will certainly make an impact this fall because they're going to need help in the secondary. Speaking of that 2024 class, they brought in 18 guys en route to a 14th ranked cycle. Saw plenty of great ads, though. They landed 2 5-stars. They had a third one, in safety Xavier Filizami. Lost him to Texas very late in the cycle. This class was on track for some real dominance. They lost 5 4-stars in the last month before the early NSD period. That's certainly hard, Nick, and that's something you got to, just be prepared for. And, the NIL era. This is going to happen. It's unfortunate it happened to Florida. It really almost ruined what was a really good class. Not to be, forgotten, though, is 2 5-stars that landed 4th and 6th ranked overall prospects, QB DJ Lagaway and defensive lineman LJ McCray. Without these two guys, though, the class probably would have been completely a failure, especially with some of those late losses. Lagaway, they're comparing him to Anthony Richardson. McCray, a top 10 prospect from the state of Florida. DJ from Texas, they're able to fend, a lot of suitors off for him, especially late. This is huge for Florida, Nick, being able to go in to, opposing territory and pluck a, massive elite quarterback like this away. That might just be the saving grace for Florida and, what barely survives to be a top 15 class.
Grabbing a dual threat 5-star quarterback out of Texas is a great ad for Billy Napier and company. Top 15 class, considering a lot of the other teams in the top 15 are in the SEC. This is a great class, in my opinion, for Florida here. I know they lost some talented players, like we said, some 4-stars and that one 5-star who flipped to Texas. But I still think this is a good class for a school like Florida with what they were able to do. 6'2", 225 for Langway. A really solid dual threat quarterback, like you said, the comps to AR Anthony Richardson, who, of course, was successful at Florida and now is in the pros with the Colts. Here, I think this is a good comparison. LJ McCray, another solid player on the defensive line, another great piece to add to the defensive line at 6'4", 279, a true 5-star, 98 out of 100 given his rating from 247 Sports. I really think he's a fantastic player, a big, physical, solid defensive lineman coming from Daytona Beach. So again, grabbing a 5-star in-state, keeping that talent home is always positive. They have some really talented high-end 4-stars as well. Some other guys on the defensive side of the ball, and Miles Graham, a solid linebacker. Jaheen Hawkins as well, a good wide receiver, a bit undersized, but a good 4-star coming from IMG Academy, which, in-state is a good school to kind of grab talent from, considering what they're able to do at the high school level. I think this class is good for Billy Napier here. I think he's continuing to get the guys in and slowly build. I think you got to continue to give a guy like Billy Napier time, and you will get results at a school like Florida.
That top 100 linebacker, Miles Graham. They also added 2 more defensive linemen, 2 more wide receivers, a pair of running backs. Class had lots of potential, ended up with some good versatility. Ended a little underwhelming with some of those late flips. That was certainly, not great for momentum. But I think overall, like you said, these 2 elite players can certainly uplift both sides of the ball for Florida in some key areas. In terms of portal work, 2 years in a row they lost good defensive lineman Antoine Powell-Ryland last year. Ended up having a massive year for Virginia Tech. Princely Umanellan, he's walking. That's a big loss for them. But they did have some hits. Caleb Banks, Cam Jackson provided some good work for the defensive line. Lennell Hudson was an impressive help at right tackle when he got on the field. And then Graham Mertz was obviously really good. We'll discuss him when we move to the offense, but he was a massive success for them. He's coming back for next season. This offensive line needs some serious retooling, though. And they started with Devon Manuel from Arkansas as a massive 6'8", 300-pound tackle. Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon. He only allowed 6 sacks in 3 years as a starter for San Diego State. They also picked up a nice, talented receiver. Reuniting Graham Mertz with Shamiri Dyke from Wisconsin. In this class, only 5 ads on defense, but some fine defensive backs in Tre'Quez Bridges and DJ Douglas, solid edge, and George Gums from NIU. Highly coveted defensive tackle and Joey Slackman, and a elite run defender from Penn. We're obviously going to talk about some of these guys more in depth when we move to the defensive side of the ball, but what do you make of this portal class so far, Nick? Really the last 2 years, they've added some really good players. No elite players by any means, but, hits on Mertz and whatnot. Some of these other guys, certainly impressive. I like what they did last year on the offensive line. Some of those guys didn't exactly pan out. Only 5 ads on defense, but these guys can be high-end contributors for this defense.
They did lose some talent to the portal, which is certainly bringing this down here. Obviously, Trevor Etienne, Princely Umanellan going to Ole Miss, a very talented player. Princely is, Scooby Williams, another guy they lost, a really solid player for them. I think Joey Slackman's a great ad coming in from the FCS level at Penn, a big physical defensive lineman, a good ad in this class, a guy that has some serious talents. Tre'Quez Bridges is another solid player at cornerback. You can really plug him in early on. George Gums, like you said, the talented edge rusher from NIU, a really nice pickup there. And then Grayson Howard from South Carolina, the linebacker, a really talented, big, physical, hard-hitting linebacker as well for this class. They brought in Mertz last year, who a lot of people questioned it and said, Mertz is not going to be an SEC quarterback, but Mertz shattered expectations and really got better as the season went on. And I think this is a class overall that's going to prove to have some talented players on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, certainly not, massive overhaul by any means, but they're certainly focusing on some key areas they need help in. I think these guys can, all collectively make an impact, and sometimes that's all you need from the portal. You don't need, a Heisman quarterback to arrive, via transfer. Looking at that offense, back-to-back seasons of, 28 and then 29 points per game in between that area. So not great improvements, but there was certainly discrepancy in the last 2 years. Anthony Richardson obviously did some work as a passer, really just showcased impressive talent, did what he could for what was, a pretty bad team. Obviously, he went high in the NFL draft. Graham Mertz was highly impressive, though, and we were pretty much wrong on this one, Nick. We certainly said that he'd be better than he was with the Badgers. We certainly said that he was limited in that scheme, as everybody is, and he was a much more talented player than we saw at Wisconsin. But we didn't think he'd be fourth in the conference in pass yards per game, first in completion rating. We only had a couple of interceptions on the year, 20-3 TD to pick ratio, for 32.5 attempts per game. That's a phenomenal ratio. They were really able to get his play to match his talent and then some, despite not having a real impressive group of proven pass catchers. Mertz had a heck of a season, Nick. He's coming back for more. He's only going to continue to grow under Rob Sale. What do you make of, what was kind of a miss by most of the media, including us?
Yeah, we really did miss the mark on that one. Got to admit when you're wrong occasionally here. I think, Graham Mertz is a really good quarterback who is improving under the system. You thought it was going to be tough to bring in a guy from Wisconsin where he just struggled in tough situations there, but getting in a better system, an offense that was tailor-made around him and structured for his needs has really worked out. 72% comp rate is just impressive as hell. 2,900 yards passing, 20 touchdowns, 3 picks, a fantastic ratio there. He looked composed in the pocket. He looked locked in at pretty much all times. He really felt comfortable there, was able to pick out and find his targets. He wasn't working with the most talented wide receivers, but he got the best out of them and some of the guys they have in this unit. If they can get some more talented weapons from Mertz, I think this is a team that can continue to be on the rise. Mertz is a really solid pocket passer, a good guy, good field vision, very rarely makes mistakes, really accurate with the ball, and that's fantastic to have in the SEC offense.
Yeah, that receiving core, Ricky Pearsall, former ASU transfer, he was tremendous, highlight reel all year. We alluded to Eugene Wilson really emerged, other second leading pass catcher with 61 grabs for 538. Arliss Boardingham at tight end, a redshirt freshman ended up being their third leading pass catcher. Khalil Jackson, the pretty impressive talent. I was happy with what he was able to do, some of his receptions. And then after that, Montreal Johnson, Trevor Etienne being the top pass catcher. So they didn't have a lot of different guys to, look to. And again, we've talked about how it's really a young receiving core. Guys like Gene and Mizell are certainly going to get involved as time goes on, along with Shamir Dyke. So I think they're certainly formulating a nice core for 2024. But this is certainly, one of the worst ones in the conference. At least coming into 2023, it was. And Mertz had a great year for what he was working with. Look at that backfield. Montreal Johnson, he was freshman Sunbelt Player of the Year under Napier. They've followed each other, of course, to Gainesville. Him and Etienne formed a nice duo. But he's off to Georgia, going to play for the rival Treon Webb, pretty high-ranked prospect. He's going to step into that number 2 role. We knew that losing Anthony Richardson would put more stress on these backs. The team went from 200 to 150 rushing yards per game. Also were worse on a yards per carry mark by 1.3 yards. This is certainly a great rushing attack. Both running backs had over 5 yards per attempt. They really beat up, though. These guys played a lot of snaps and showcased a nice balance. Both had 750-plus yards. They both averaged exactly 68 rushing per contest. So this is a nice complementary running game. Had a couple of games where they were completely stonewalled. For the most part, this is, a part of this team that really willed them to victory. It was a nice complementary piece because we didn't expect the passing attack to be as good as it was, but I think the rushing attack certainly held up their end of the bargain. But losing Etienne to your rival is not great, especially when some of the reports were indicating he wanted to have the backfield to himself. And that's not going to be the case up there in Athens, Nick. So this is kind of a bad look.
It is certainly a bad look. It didn't make a whole lot of sense. Like you said, the reports that I was reading as well was that he wanted to be the feature back, the star back, when he goes to a school in Georgia that has been known for the last couple of years to do that 3 to 4 back rotation. They like to have that good balance, plugging in different backs, and it seems to be very successful for the Bulldogs. I don't really know why Etienne went to Georgia. I guess we'll see how time plays out on that one. I really thought that he could have stayed at Florida and got the bulk of the carries here. Montreal Johnson, that was a back that I love. I loved him coming in from Louisiana. I said when he transferred in originally that he could be a huge impact player in the SEC. We saw a little bit more of him this year, 817 yards on the ground, 5.4 yards per carry, and 5 touchdowns for him, plus 30 receptions for 236 and a score out of the backfield. I think he's a fantastic back, a good leader, a nice physical, hard runner who Billy Napier brought with him from Louisiana. He's a really talented back. I like to see him be that big number 1 back here. This wide receiving room we talked about, I'll just briefly touch on. Ricky Pearsall is a fantastically fun wide receiver to watch. He's one of the best wide receivers in the country, a really talented, underrated guy at the start of the season who really came into his own. He's a great number 1 target. Him and Mertz next year is a fantastic connection to have for this offense. I like to see them target him a lot here. He's really good across the field, a really solid physical wide receiver.
Now you look at the offensive line. This is certainly a big pressing issue for this football team. They were 113th in sacks allowed. Thought they did a pretty good job in the portal last year. and it didn't exactly come to fruition in terms of success. They lose both of their guards. That's certainly Richie Leonard to Florida State, Micah Mukazu they picked up from Baylor. He's going to Nebraska. Some holes they got to fill there. I think, center Kingsley Ugukan, I think he's going to come back. So that's certainly good for them. Jake Slaughter was really good in that position as well. So they'll certainly get those guys plugged in, I think, all as starters. Austin Barber was a little underwhelming compared to a big year 2 seasons ago. Damian George, he was, below average as well, the Alabama transfer. The issue here is they don't have much depth. They don't have that many natural tackles as well, so they don't have too many different guys they can rotate. Lendale Hudson, he was a senior day attendee, but I believe he has enough eligibility to come back next season. Kanaji Harris, he's probably going to be slotted into more full-time roles. Both of those guys were impressive when they got on the field. But again, this offensive line struggled. They didn't have many options. They do have 5 new faces coming in, but this is not going to be fixed imminent. Napier had 4 guys drafted in a 3-year span on the offensive line, including 3 right guards that were great. 2 of them this past season, Robert Hunt and Kevin Dotson, they were having elite seasons at the pro level. So this is a guy that can develop, especially on the interior. This is going to take time to fix this here, Nick. It's not a great situation to be in with what they have on this offensive line. They still made it work, though. Mertz was under great duress, and he still put up the numbers he did. They can get this going in the right direction, especially with, another Anthony Richardson-like quarterback coming in. He could really beef up this offense to a high tune.
Kingsley Uguhan, he potentially was going to the draft. He was kind of pinned as, a late day 3 kind of guy. I think he's going to return and try and raise his draft stock at center. A nice physical center, has some good experience. Losing their 2 guards to the portal is obviously not ideal, but they do have some freshmen that could step up. Kanaji Harris is a true freshman at right guard. I think he'll plug in there, get some good experience. They might have to go after a different type of player at left guard. I don't really know if the depth chart really supports that. The tackles, I think Austin Barber has a lot of work to do, but I think he's a good player who has a good set of skills to work with. He just has to kind of go out there and execute it on the field. They are working on bringing in players on the trenches on the defensive side of the ball. They do need to continue to beef up their offensive line and hopefully get some talented players to plug in. Napier is solid at coaching the offensive line. We've seen some success, like you said. You rattled off some names that got drafted to the pros. So I certainly think he can put together a really good offensive line given the tools to succeed. I like to see him continue to try and work on that and plug in some guys on this offensive line. They had some physical players in the past under him at Louisiana and early on in his Florida tenure. If they can continue to do that and plug in those talented players, protect the quarterback in Mertz, and then obviously the future quarterback in Langway, it could be very successful for this offense.
Yeah, they had Osiris Torrance go first round last year. So, this is a guy who can develop players on the O-line, especially on the interior. A big theme you're going to see here, especially on defense, is a lot of youth on this football team. I think it's certainly one thing that's lost when talking about Florida is they don't have many guys one bit that have, great deals of experience. We'll go ahead and move to that defensive side of the ball. Ron Roberts, he comes in from Auburn, former, Dave Aranda assistant. They're going to pair him up with Austin Armstrong. Much like the offensive numbers are quite similar. They went from 411 to 382 yards per game allowed. That was a nice drop, but they were still in that 27, 28 points per game allowed range, so that was still very similar. We talked about the attention this defensive line get. I think this is a massive bright spot for Florida, even with the loss of Princely Human who's a great pass rusher for them. They get mostly all these guys coming back. Some really good size, some nice depth. LJ McCray now joins the fold. Talked about some of the transfers they had last year. They showed up, when Caleb Banks and Cam Jackson, to help anchor down the interior. Jamari Lyons, Desmond Watson's kind of a forgotten player. Justice Boone, I know he was unable to play much of this year. I don't think he saw the field at all with an injury. Kelby Collins, Tyreek Sapp, TJ Searcy, and of course Joey Slackman. This could be one of the better defensive lines in the country, Nick, if they can beef them up accordingly, because they do have to improve them. Run defense was pretty poor. They gave up exactly 329 rushing to LSU and Kentucky. On average in conference play, allowed 193 yards per game. It's got to be better, Nick. I think this defensive line can really, improve that number significantly. From a pass rushing standpoint, we're going to have to wait and find out. But this is the blueprint to get the job done in college football. Is you got to be sturdy on the interior, and that's what they're doing right now. And, again, a lot of youth on this side of the ball. Very excited for the defensive line.
This is a unit that has to be very talented and a lot better for this Florida team. They got to be better at getting after the quarterback and producing sack numbers. It is a very youthful team, like you said, but there are some solid players across the board here. Cam Jackson, Caleb Banks, Kelby Collins are all really talented players that could be involved. Tyreek Sapp, another really solid player as well. Napier has been hitting the recruiting trail, trying to get guys in. He's made some work as well, getting a guy like George Gums coming off the edge. We talked about him in the transfer class. So they're trying to address this. If you have success in the trenches, it's very key in the SEC. You have to build from there first. I think the secondary is something they can address later on. I think they can really work on getting this front part of this defense very talented, plugging in guys that are physical, strong players at nose tackle and defensive tackle to get after the quarterback and produce solid sack numbers.
Another area of concern that's, I think, certainly a red flag for Florida is the middle of their defense. Shamar James was having an impressive season before getting hurt. Back-to-back solid seasons from him, but he's so far just been an above-average player at best. Like you said, with Scooby Williams, their third leading tackler, transfers out to A&M. Next best linebacker, Manny Nunnery. He's also out. Trajada Mitchell, physical player they got from Ohio State. And then Derek Wingle, they played about 200 snaps each. Pick up Grayson Howard from South Carolina. And that 4-star, 81st overall recruit, Miles Graham, who is a Gainesville native, is going to hopefully come in and probably have to play immediately. A lot to figure out here in the middle. They've not really paid much attention to it. This is a massive concern, Nick, because the defensive line, it can certainly improve, and I think it will, but to be good against the run in this conference, the linebackers also have to be sound and they have to be physical. And this is just not a good unit right now one bit, especially if James is going to be beat up, which that's going to be the expectation when you're playing this many snaps because there's not much depth at this position. Linebacking for Florida is probably going to be one of the worst in the conference next season.
Is certainly a worrisome unit. I think Shamir James is a fantastic player, like you said, when he's healthy. Is he going to be fully healthy this year? That's something we have to really be concerned about if you're observing this Florida team closely. I think they did make a great move bringing in Grayson Howard. He is a good player. Plug him in immediately, in my opinion. He's going to have to get reps early on. Tejada Mitchell as well at middle linebacker. He's a player that's a younger guy, a transfer. He needs to come in and get some good experience early on. The depth chart is weak at linebacker. Some younger even younger guys, true freshmen might have to step up and play early on for this team at linebacker, which is concerning if you're a Florida fan. I think that's something that you worry about, is that this is a very, very shallow class in terms of overall talent at linebacker and shallow team, period. But when you have a guy like James, if he's healthy, he's a very big X factor. I'm just worried he's not going to be able to stay healthy this year.
And another part of their defense is certainly looking to capitalize on some of the talent they do have. Secondary, the pass defense was slightly better in 23 than the 22, 59% opponent completion rating, 226 yards. Those are improvements, but overall this unit wasn't great. Only 3 interceptions total from this defense. They were 132nd in FBS and 30-plus passing plays allowed, 30-plus yard plays allowed, that is. Some good players here, though. Devin Moore, he was really good. He was beat up, saw about only 200 snaps in his own right. Jason Marshall really hasn't gotten back on track to that early career form we saw as a former high-end recruit. Jaden Hill, a guy who has plenty of speed and plenty of untapped potential. He transfers out, as does Jalen Kimber. 5-star safety Kamari Wilson, he's going after only playing about 2 games last year. Miguel Mitchell saw some good time at safety as well. He's gone. Some notable turnover here, but they do bring in Tre'Quiz Bridges from Oregon, who had a good season 2 years ago, kind of lost his starting role with the Ducks this past year. DJ Douglas at Tulane was an underrated performer for them. They do have that 3-star we talked about, Jordan Castell. He was their best player on this side of the ball. He was their leading tackler, a very impressive player. He did have one of those interceptions along with, a team-high 60 tackles, and a couple of pass breakups as well. All in all, this is a bad defense. When the run gets eaten up and there's big plays given up over top, this is not good for the Gators, Nick. But again, they do have some potential on that defensive line and here in the secondary. But this is not the Gator defense of old, especially in the secondary. A lot of improvement has to be taken over here, or they're going to get throttled in this new-look SEC. They're
going to certainly have to find a way to improve this unit. This unit has been weak for them. Jason Marshall, I think, is a talented player when he's playing at full potential at right cornerback. Jordan Castell is a good player at the star position. They move him around a lot. This is a unit that's not very deep. Another defensive part of this unit that's not deep at all. I am worried about this defense top to bottom. We're going to analyze it in the offseason when we do the preview in the summer, but I'm very concerned about this defense. It could really be a struggle point for this defense, and when you're playing those tougher teams, the SEC, that can hit you on the ground or hit you through the air, it's going to be a tough look certainly for this team.
Now, the thing for me is, this defense had 39 total players record a tackle. That includes a couple of offensive guys, off a turnover, on special teams, whatever. Only 2 of them were seniors, though. Same for the offense in terms of youth. Lots of it. This team is incredibly young, probably one of the youngest in the country. 0 experience, basically. They battled each week. They played hard. This is a very good notion for Florida moving forward, something that doesn't get talked about a lot. As experience certainly reigns supreme. They don't have any of it. At least going from last season, they didn't. And certainly a lot of disappointing football closing out the year on a losing streak. They had a very tough schedule. They played. Losing to Arkansas was pretty embarrassing. Battled hard against Georgia in that game. They lost by 23. LSU, they're trying to play catch up. Missouri game. We thought they were going to get blown out in Columbia, Nick, and they showed up very well. We did pick them to lose to Florida State, even against that, quarterback situation they had, and ended up being the case. But they played very hard that day against the Noles and against Missouri. Even though they lost 5 in a row, Nick, they battled in these games. I was very impressed by Florida and a lot of their youth here. There's players that, were earning they're earning a good reputation on tape on both sides of the ball. The youth here is something that is big for Florida. I know it's kind of a scapegoat excuse, right? But I think it's certainly a good one, especially with the back half of the schedule they faced. Very impossible task. Not a lot of teams probably did what they did, losing all of them, of course. But I was impressed with how they battled and competed with all this youth.
I was impressed as well. I think this is a team overall that's a very young team. You got to give Billy Napier time, in my opinion. At Jim McElwain, Will Muschamp, Dan Mullen were all fired too soon, in my opinion. Billy Napier needs to have time. The leash is very short in Gainesville. They want to be able to go out there and win like they did under Spurrier and Meyer. And I respect that certainly, but you have to give a coach time to bring in and put his guys in, especially in the new era with NIL. Florida right now is also, the news came out today, they're being investigated regarding the Jaden Rashada, circus that happened with NIL last year, and a lot of unanswered questions about that incident. So there's certainly something to watch there with that investigation at this point in time. I think, this is a team that's young and continuing to evolve. They're in a good position recruiting-wise. Florida's full of talented players. It's still a brand name you want to play for if you're a kid coming out of high school. I think if you give Napier time, continue to recruit, he can bring in his guys and beef up that defensive line first and then work on the secondary and plug in some more impact players. I think the offense is continuing to trend in the right direction with some small minor tweaks. It's a young team that's gaining experience over time. 5-7 is obviously not a result Florida fans want, but I think this year they could potentially push towards being bowl eligible. And if you get to a bowl game this year and potentially win that bowl game, I think it can help extend Napier's clock a little bit longer. You do have to give him time, in my opinion. I think you're going to agree with me on that.
Yeah, looking at the final thoughts here and the final verdict, I think this is the right hire. Florida has been a victim of some late losses in recruiting. They're able to still snag some elite players. Defensive line is being built up the correct way. Secondary, I think, is going to march forward. Some clear holes at the offensive line and at linebacker. But he's shown the ability to develop at the offensive line position. His defense at UAL had some great discipline as well. And you've seen that with their secondary being one of the nation's best year after year. This 2025 class, though, it's going to be big for him. I think he needs to make some splashes in terms of big names in the portal. I think, Slackman's a guy that a lot of people wanted, and Florida got him. It's a tough schedule, though, as well as that's going to be the case for everybody moving forward. They get UGA and Texas back-to-back, for example, but they have a pretty loaded home slate overall in 2024. I think they need to, pick up a signature win. I picked them to beat Tennessee in 2023, and they beat them by 13 with only one good quarter of offense against the Vols. They knocked off a great Kyle Whittingham team in 2022 with some late heroics there. Still searching for that signature win in conference, Nick, and they need to accomplish that in 2024 for the fan base to feel the same way. It's obviously been a very bumpy start, but I've flat out predicted this schedule perfect the last 2 years for Florida, looking to do that third year in a row. But I think I'm well equipped to talk about this team. I'm well equipped to say this is the right hire, and they're slowly building Florida here. Obviously, with these new conferences, it's going to be hard to compete, right? It's going to be very, very tough. But I think Florida, they still have a great home field advantage, one of the best in the country. Napier has shown the ability to be great in these certain key areas that are lacking right now. The team played really hard, and that's what matters when trying to develop. They do need that signature win in 2024, though.
I think I'm totally on board with you across the board. The Gainesville, the Swamp, it's one of the toughest places to play. I went to a game. I saw Alabama and Florida play a couple of years ago, and that was the most intimidating atmosphere I've been in as a road fan. I've been to a lot of other stadiums across the country. I was blown away by the Swamp. It's so loud in there. It's impossible to hear yourself think, and it's got to be even worse at field level, which is impressive for what they're able to do in that stadium. When they are a good team and that stadium is rocking, it is impossible to play in there. I also have to give Billy Napier credit. This team goes out and plays a tough schedule. Even the non-conference, outside of Samford, they don't roll over and die. They have the yearly game with Florida State, who obviously are a very talented team. That's a tough matchup. And this year they're playing Miami and UCF, two tough out-of-conference games. They get Miami at home and UCF at home. Those are two interesting matchups to watch. They got to play A&M this year. They got to play Georgia and Texas back-to-back, like you said, but then also LSU, Ole Miss, and Florida State, plus those two games against UJ and Texas, the last 5 to close out the season, is a brutal stretch, plus a road trip to Tennessee put in there as well earlier in the season. So this is not an easy schedule by any stretch of the imagination. Billy Napier is continuing to build. I think he is the right coach. You got to give him time. Like I said earlier, the leash is extremely short in Gainesville. They want instant results, but in this day and age with NIL and the strength of the SEC, instant results at Florida are not going to come immediately. You got to give a coach time to build and put together a winning program. I think, like you said, if they do get that huge marquee win against, let's say they beat Texas this year, that resets the clock a little bit here. You need to give Napier time. I think he's a great coach, good experience. I think he's a good recruiter as well. Slowly we'll continue to see that over time, and he'll be able to get a lot out of the talent he has, which we've already seen so far. I think Florida are trending in the right direction. They're not going to be super competitive this year, but I think look out for 25, 26. This is a team that can be very competitive in the new look SEC.
Yeah, I mean, with that schedule, it's hard to feel confident, right? But this is a problem for everybody across the country now with these new conferences. Everyone faces this A-plus schedule. If you're playing the video game, that's what they would call it, because this is going to be absurd. Certainly going to look for a couple signature wins, though, and I think they'll find them. We'll predict it, in 8 months from now, Nick. We'll figure that out. But for now, I think Billy Napier is the right hire. We'll see what they can do for the rest of this offseason, especially in spring ball. And this is a team I like to continue to march forward, though. I'll look to try and predict their schedule eye for eye once more. Appreciate you joining me, Nick. Interesting conversation we had here today. One we've been waiting to have, but I think one that's right on the mark.
Yeah, I think this is something that's certainly fun to talk about. Florida's an incredibly important brand in college football, a national championship program in the past, and a really important program in the SEC history. It's good to keep an eye on what they're doing down there, and I think it's fun. Football's better when Florida's better, so hopefully they continue to trend in the right direction.
Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.